Our first speaker is my colleague Michelle Stockley, who is the Senior Educator at the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne. Her presentation reports on the findings which shed light on inspiring encounters with art in the gallery and the implications of this practice for teachers working with young people. Kathryn Hendy-Ekers is the Curriculum Manager for the Visual Arts and Media for the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority. Her paper will provide examples of the collaborative work between classroom teachers and the Curriculum Manager for the Visual Arts in the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority. Actually, I'm doing everyone's bios, not just the long papers, but the short papers too. Esther's giving a long paper. Esther McNaughton is a long-time gallery educator at the Suter Art Gallery, Te Aratoi or Whakatu in Nelson in New Zealand. She will discuss the results of collaborative insider research that asked what important contributions art gallery educators add to student learning. Kylie Neagle is the Education Officer of the Art Gallery of South Australia. She will discuss the use of curiosity cards to inspire teachers and provide students with an alternative way into a work of art, sparking their curiosity and developing their confidence in responding to visual information. Yudha Scholes is the Head of Art at Scotch College. His presentation will focus on the challenging, inspiring and rewarding Xian-inspired Surreal bust sculpture project. So let's commence this exciting session about galleries and learning. And please don't be afraid of the bell, it's your friend.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So, as Katie mentioned, this paper reports on a small research project actually taken over the last 18 months by educators at the National Gallery of Victoria in collaboration with researchers from the University of Melbourne Graduate School of Education. I'm actually going to use the clicker, would be helpful. I'm going to begin by just briefly introducing the gallery and the learning team, for those of you that may not know it. Also the focus and the context of the research, a little bit about the methodology and participants, before concluding with a brief mention of how we explored the relationship between theory and practice and currently working towards a gallery educator resource. So this is the National Gallery of Victoria. We have two sites, NGV International, where we house both contemporary and historical international art, and the Ian Potter Centre, NGV Australia, where we've got a significant collection of Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australian art from the colonial period to the present day. A little bit about the learning team. Educators at the National Gallery of Victoria are fairly aspirational, and we've heard a lot of that over the last few days, but we aspire to engage our gallery visitors through transformative learning experiences centred on encounters with extraordinary art. And so while our educators actually work on a range of learning programs for all year levels, students and teachers are a very significant audience for us, so that's what this project really focuses on. And we do have, I should say, strategic relationships with both the Department of Education and Catholic Education Melbourne, and so that also shapes the program somewhat. A little bit about the research. NGV educators are qualified teachers who have all developed significant practice-based experience and knowledge related to gallery-based teaching and learning. So what this research project actually did is it provided an opportunity for educators to more formally document and interrogate practice-based knowledge and deepen their shared understanding of good practice. Educators largely learn on the job, and the research also afforded an opportunity to articulate and document practice for new staff, and we have recruited a lot of new staff recently. More broadly, of course, within the museum education sector, there's been a growing interest in undertaking research into practice and audience engagement, including by practitioner researchers, and using innovative methodologies to capture and interpret the personal, fleeting and often invisible encounters that we actually have with our visitors. So a little bit about the methodology and participants. As I said, it was a fairly modest, small-scale study. It's actually based entirely, at its core, on about 7 observations of primary school classes with grade 5 and 6 students, some of them in the gallery, but a number of them were actually filmed in the Melbourne Graduate School of Education Science of Learning classroom. Very unusual space that has 16 cameras and capacity for 32 mics. And even though this isn't our natural environment to work, we felt it was an opportunity for the educator to capture the conversations and the exchanges that went on between students and educators on film and on camera. And I should at this point acknowledge my colleagues who put themselves under scrutiny to do this and the other research projects. And also I should mention Robert Brown, who submitted the original abstract for this work and who facilitated this and has been a real lead in this research. And that was supported by many group discussions, recorded conversations with participants, including teachers, students and educators. So we had a number of perspectives on those encounters and really pulled them apart. So I'm not going to play this film at the moment, but this just gives you the context of the Science of Learning classroom. So we brought the kids in there and they looked at digital reproductions of a couple of artworks in the gallery. I have to say this was quite different for our educators to actually work with reproductions, but also in this type of environment, and really illuminated for us how much we use the context of the gallery and how much we rely on the aura, in a sense, of the original artwork in our practice. I'm going to skip over that, but this is also just an indication of some of the reflections. I'm not going to dwell on these though, because I want to look at some of these in a little bit more detail later. But after the sessions, there were interviews with educators about why they'd chosen works, done particular things. The sessions in the gallery were harder for all sorts of reasons, harder to film, and so what the researchers produced out of that were written narratives that provided quite colourful and textured written descriptions of the session that takes place. One of the things that you'll notice is they pick up on the encounter right from the beginning, even when we're organising the stools and getting the children seated, because we realise that that's actually an important part of our practice, creating that sort of learning space within the bigger gallery. But then, as you can see, this narrative unfolds into, Jenny ultimately inviting them to share what they know. And so these were really wonderful things to share back with the educators and to see their practice documented in this.
And how was holidays?
Oh, and there was audio associated with that too. So these are, again, some of the reflections, the student voice in there. Also, I love that first one from the educator though. I mean, this was ostensibly a class on Indigenous art, but, one of the big learning intentions for our educator was to introduce them to a space and to establish a lifelong relationship with that space. So you've got that sort of curriculum content, but you've got that much bigger ambition. So just to move on to the way that we explored theory and practice within the research project, the educators actually conceptualised the exchange that went on between the educator and the student and the artwork in the gallery as artful learning. And naming learning as artful really was to highlight the complex interplay between the young people, the artwork and the educator that takes place in the gallery, and one that requires educators to really skillfully and perceptively draw upon a whole repertoire of strategies that are planned but not formulaic, effective and analytical, and also responsive to the learning interests and preferences of young people and their holistic engagement. So it's about their emotional engagement as well as their cognitive engagement and sensory engagement. One of the researchers, John Quay, brought a perspective grounded in education philosophy to the research. So he viewed the learning encounters through a model that brought focus to the being of the participants, and this is integral to the doing and knowing in a learning encounter. I feel really confident that our educators would have always described the practice as student-centred, but Quay's conceptualisation of the relationship between being, doing and knowing prompted us to really focus on how we know who our students are, what we expect them to be, and how this impacts what we do and how we do it as educators. I was quite interested in Flossie's comment yesterday about inviting the whole person in, because I think this sort of touches on that a bit. In the teaching context of the gallery, where educators work with new groups of students daily and often on the hour, what we know about students, who they are and what they could be, is often judged in a very short and compressed timeline. But of course that offers us some advantages sometimes, because we have no preconceptions about who these students are or what they could do. And what is really delightful, I think, is that students frequently forge new ways of being when they actually are in the learning space of the gallery. And that's often highlighted when teachers are surprised at the way some individuals respond in the gallery. So as educators, we don't just focus on content knowledge or what the students can do, but how this relates to who the students are, what they can be, and we hope that when they leave us, that they go away with a different idea of who they can be and who they are. The Quay's model of being, doing and knowing also was a useful framework for considering educator practice as well. And we generated a very long list of ways that educators their work can be looked in this framework of being, doing and knowing. So these are just a few of the words here, but educators have to be capable of working with diverse and mostly unknown school groups, and as I said, often limited experience of art in the gallery, and very quickly have to adapt and attune to the needs and interests of the group. So the educators are informed, but they're not bounded by any one strategy, and they draw from really multimodal ways of interacting. So they might be storytellers, they're involved in role-playing, they're artists, they draw also. So it was just interesting to think about educator practice quite broadly. Educators have to judge when to lead and when to follow, what strategies to use, and when to transition from one line of inquiry and strategy to another, all the time ensuring that the scope and progression of the session actually meets the school's expectations. So determining what and how much information to impart and when to do that involves a continual checking of signals of student engagement. And these are all things very relevant to the classroom too, which requires what Van Manen describes as pedagogical tact and child sense. I'm skipping over a lot of this research, but you may like to follow that up later. So the theoretical frameworks and perspectives explored alongside the videos and the narratives produced during the research inspired a lot of fruitful and reflective discussion about practice among NGV educators. So the researchers involved in the project are working on a number of papers, but the challenge was actually to find a practical way to present the research so that it could be easily accessed and used by others, including our new staff. So the result is a professional practice research that we're still doing a bit of work on, but basically it's made up of a number of elements. There's some introductory background papers introducing the resource and what we see as art for learning at the NGV, and then some theory-informed discussion papers on, because we're particularly interested in our educators getting a bit of a language around the theory of the learning that took place, and particularly in a museum environment. So we look at engagement, we look at learning, and we generated a list of characteristics of good gallery educated practice and professional references. And then there's a series of learning encounter interactive PowerPoints that are really the crux of it, where the educators can engage in some of these videos and respond to questions and prompts. And then we included the full case study narratives and videos in that. So just as a taste of how we look at student engagement here, we built on the work that one of the researchers, Robert Brown, has been doing, looking at signals of engagement that educators could perhaps read and consider in working with a group. We looked at learning as something broad, constantly evolving and quite dynamic, but we also honed in on the particular learnings that take place within the gallery. And I think we've spoken a lot about some of these things in the last few days, how we're learning about the world through learning about art in our lives, and of course developing learning dispositions for learning from art. So the Gallery Educator Practice Guide, this was a really interesting list to pull together of about when we had outside researchers actually looking at what we do and then defining what the key characteristics of that were. And, you know, on the surface perhaps you might expect a lot of pedagogical strategies, but, you know, welcoming was one of the very important ones. And so it's about creating the whole emotional environment of the work. So this is two indicators out of a list of 26. So the Gallery Educator resource included, as I said, these series of learning encounters, and this is really the guts of the in terms of the outcome of the resource, because this brings together all the different elements of it. So there are 5 different PowerPoints, and each one of them is built around one of the learning encounters. So there are 3 that are based on videos and 2 that are based on written narratives from observations. So what we included is the context and artworks as an introduction. Then each of them includes excerpts from the focus video or narrative, but focusing only a couple of minutes, focusing on the opening encounter, because we realised how important that was, setting the scene. Aspects of educator practice, so each one focuses on a slightly different aspect of practice, and then the learning outcomes of the session. We've got educator, student and teacher reflections on above, quotes from the relevant literature to engage people in the ideas, and throughout questions for the user of the learning encounter. So I'm just going to run you very quickly through some excerpts from one of the learning encounters to finish off with. So we have the context, it was a 20-minute session in a simulated gallery environment where the participants were. We have the artworks that were introduced, and then prompts to encourage the user to think about, you know, what learning could these artworks afford? Why might you choose to use these artworks to discuss? And then we have the educator's reflection on those things. So whoever's using it, you know, encouraged to think about their own thoughts, but then to compare it with what one of our experienced educators has included. Now I'm just going to see if I can get this video on here. I guess this looks like it'll work. This is an opening encounter. Now it includes everything from organising the chairs, but you know,
So what I think would be comfortable is if you sit in a bit of a semicircle around this work so that I can see everybody and get to hear from everybody.
It's very slow.
One chair short.
It's very slow.
Are you sure?
I didn't really walk this slow.
Right, so big welcome from me. This is a very exciting research project we're involved in.
And
today we're going to look
slowly
at 2 works of art together. And the most important thing we're going to do today, I think, is to share a work of art and discuss it together. Because I think one of the best ways of really getting to know a work of art is to get everybody's ideas together. Every now and again, I'll stop perhaps and give you some information that I know about the artwork that perhaps you wouldn't know just by looking, so that we can build up a big picture. But one thing I really want to assure you, when we talk about art, there's no right or wrong. You can say whatever you like, however strange and bizarre.
Okay, I'm going to cut it off there just because I'm conscious I don't want the bell to ring in a few minutes. So very quickly, we've got educator reflection. Oh no, actually, I think I've gone the wrong way. So we've got then questions again for the users. Why do you think the educator began the session in this way? Would you begin it in a similar or different way? And what do you have to consider when beginning an education session? So you can see that the whole focus of this is that it's very interactive and that you're encouraged to think about what goes on in the video. We have the educator's reflection. I'm going to skip over this video, but this focused on Susie actually discussing the weeping woman with a group of students. And it's really interesting to see their responses to that. But then what is the educator doing to engage the young people? And then there's a hot link back to the Gallery Educator Practice Guide. And so you can see that all the different elements of the research come together, what other strategies could be used, and then compare your views to the following student, teacher and educator reflections. I just want to point out a couple as we go through. I think it's nice to know that your teacher is enjoying themselves, and she looked like she was really enjoying herself. And so this idea of the educator being passionate and, you know, really loving their work is very important. These were student reflections. The teacher who was there in the session, you know, really honed in on the use of voice, the way Susie engaged with the group, got down to their level. I'm going to skip the learning outcome.
Yes.
Oh, actually, I just want to quickly go back. No, that's not that one.
Yes.
Skip on. The students again reflecting on everybody having a different perspective and what they learned from that. Teacher reflections here. This last one from the teacher was interesting. To be honest, often if I go to something like this, I'm just sitting there and thinking about what stuff I've got on, but I was really interested as well. Slightly alarming, actually, but very revealing, and I think we've all worked with teachers like that. You know, but on the other hand, you'll also get teachers who are really highly engaged, and great that it had that impact. Okay, because I don't want that bell to go, I'm just going to refer to some of the questions that are here. But you can see that then whoever's using the resource is encouraged to look back at some of the papers, think about what the young people are learning. There's some excerpts from the literature here. We're looking at Rika Burnham and Alec Kaiki and conversation, dialogue and discussion, and how that might relate to practice, and to get the user to think of that. One of the things we really wanted to investigate was inquiry learning. What is it? We say it, but what does it mean? And so you've got some educator reflections on some of the issues that we discussed with that, as well as the literature, references for the staff to look at, and really that's it. So I hope that that might be has been of some interest, and I do think that some of the things that we discussed, while it was primarily prepared for gallery educators, I do think that there are many things in there that are very relevant to anybody who's working with art in a creative way, in a classroom or in any other setting. Thank you.
Well, mine might be a little bit shorter. My name's Kathryn Hendy-Ekers. I actually do work very closely with Michelle, so often Michelle is a very hard act to follow. So I think my presentation, unfortunately, there was a bit of a mix-up when my abstract was printed. I put in for 2 abstracts, and the information from my other abstract came through, so I am actually talking about my research. I'm the curriculum manager for visual art for Victoria and media, but I'm also undertaking a PhD in museum education, and looking at the ways that art museums and teachers enact curriculum using contemporary art. So that's sort of the topic of my conversation. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about has been sort of said over the last few days, so I think what I'll be saying is going to really encapsulate some of the discussions that have been going on from different presenters. My PhD has been going over the last 6 years. I've been doing it part-time. I'm just about to submit, or I've submitted a final draft, and I'll submit for examination in March. So unfortunately, a lot of my material is still governed by ethics and by my potential exam. So I'm very sad that not any of this presentation actually doesn't have images in it, which is really unusual for an art teacher. So, but I will just cover my research and what I've been working on. So I'm in a quite valued position. I'm an ex-visual arts teacher. I write in curriculum, and I have a very strong interest in museum education. And in Victoria, we have some wonderful galleries. The National Gallery of Victoria is clearly one of them. And throughout my research, I've discovered that a lot of the really great enactment of curriculum, and I'll talk about, is occurring in museums, in art museums across the country. And this gallery is one particular gallery I used as a case study in my research. So, does the good work? Yes. Yep. Oh, it's my way. Okay, so I started off 5 years ago with a literature review. So in my literature review, I was looking at these sort of main themes, which did formulate my research questions. So I looked at the history of learning in art museums, and particularly the differences between learning in museums and learning in art museums, and the different pedagogies that are used and how learning is approached in those different settings. I also looked at the definition of museum and gallery, and that also informed a lot of my research, because the word museum is clearly an American term, and it does formulate a lot of the research and literature review readings I did. There's also the development of a new museology, so moving away from studying objects in cabinets to more interactive and self-directed learning approaches. So the study also, I looked at the study of audience visitation to museums in Australia, which is only quite recent. There's only really been recent research into museum visiting in Australia since the 1990s, which is really interesting. So the second point I looked at was the motivation of general audiences compared to school audiences. So why people visit museums, why teachers bring their students to museums, what are the benefits of doing that, and also the benefits, and I was looking at the connection of when the students, and this is where Michelle's research feeds in quite nicely, what happens in the museum and then what happens back at school. So, because you know, traditionally a lot of teachers will take their students to a museum or an art museum for an experience, and how valued is that in future curriculum development and work and development of curriculum, students' knowledge and skills. I also looked at the socio-context of visiting, so how visitors interact with artworks and each other in a context of the museum. So I think a lot of the literature I've been reading is very similar to what Michelle has been reading. So, sorry, I'm just finding my notes here. I also looked at the agendas as why people visit, and I've discovered there wasn't a lot of research or literature around why school groups visit museums. I also looked at the rise of learning theories in art museums, so looking at things like multiple intelligences, critical and creative thinking, social theories and theories of identity, and students forming their own interpretations of artworks based on their socio-cultural background. Looking at visual thinking strategies is one approach, looking at physical, social and personal understandings, relational aesthetics, and also aesthetic experiences, and particularly Csikszentmihalyi's flow theory. I also looked at the role of the museum educator and the teacher, and looked at exactly what Michelle has been looking at, museum pedagogy versus classroom pedagogy. So what museum educators are doing and what teachers are doing and how their practices differ. So that was another area. Then I also looked at how curriculum would operate in a museum. So particularly Eileen Hooper-Greenhill's research throughout 2000, and she's with the University of Leicester, looking at, she had an impact research project in 2007, and looked specifically at the way educators and teachers link the curriculum with museum experiences and how teachers plan visits based on the curriculum. I also looked at, there was quite a large research project here in Australia in 2011 with Griffin and Harrison, looking at what drives children's participations in art museums, and there was a proposal that the introduction of the Australian curriculum could increase student numbers and visitation to museums. So rather looking at museum education, I looked at school curriculum and saw those links between museums. So the formal, and I broke down a curriculum to look at the formal intended curriculum, so what's actually written, what happens in terms of curriculum in informal settings, such as what often museums, art museums are listed at. Looking at the hidden curriculum, and I think Sandra touched on the hidden curriculum this morning, and also the embodied curriculum. So what actually happens in an art museum or in a school setting that really shows the values and interests behind the curriculum. I looked on the practice of teachers and how their understanding of a curriculum and pedagogy, which is independent of museums. Also too, I looked at technology in museums, so what resources were available online and virtual, and the connections between using technology in museums and the use by teachers. Also, finally, looking at contemporary art and how it was perceived in museums and schools. So I looked at programs such as the Tate, MoMA and the Met and what was in. So all this literature informed the analysis of my data and formulated the research questions. I have developed a model which unfortunately I can't present to you because my supervisor said, because I was going under an examination, somebody may be around who will see that model, so you'll just have to watch that space. So now, next slide. So my 4 research questions is how public art museums cater for school-based audiences, what kind of learning about contemporary art do art museums facilitate, and how do teachers relate this learning to the curriculum? What are the roles of art museum educators and school teachers in developing learning programs and resources about contemporary art? And finally, what is a recommended model? So from my research, and I'll explain what I have done in a moment. Sorry, I'm just operating 2 things. I had an underpinning theoretical framework based on the theory of practice by Bordeaux. Bordeaux's literature looks, and he published quite a significant piece of work in 1991 with Alain Dabel, looking at the art museum going public in France and how they acquired what we know as cultural capital, which is knowledge about culture through museum visiting. So he used his series, Bordeaux used his series to make sense of the world. It was a structural theory as well as a motive, and it's really significant that I'm using Bordeaux as a theoretical framework because his research centres quite significantly on self-reflection and the position of the researcher being in the centre of the research and looking at their relationships with others in the research. So hence, that was perfect for me in my role. So I also looked at the acquisition of cultural capital, which is symbolic, so the dispositions and attitudes of students and teachers when they visit art museums, and that sort of relationship with contemporary art, and looking at how a knowledge of culture can be developed and how to read contemporary artworks to develop that knowledge of culture. I also looked at the way museums develop pedagogy for students and teachers to view and gain knowledge about contemporary art, and how contemporary art is about the issues of today and how teachers can unpack that contemporary art. So I have 3 museums that I have used as case studies. They were this museum, the National Gallery of Australia, the Queensland Art Gallery, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney. 3 very different galleries with different programs. So I have investigated with those galleries. I've interviewed the educators in the galleries, or in all 3 galleries. I also inspected or reviewed all the curriculum material that those galleries have online. I interviewed 3 teachers from each gallery about how they use the gallery and how they use that gallery with their students and what resources they use from the gallery. And I also observed the teachers with their school groups through visits. So I have lots of transcripts which I think, like Michelle has presented, will be quite valuable to use. So from that, these are some of the points that I've come up with in my analysis of the data. So a lot of the programs in museums provide learning experiences that are tailored to work with individual schools and students. So teachers really value that the school will send out information, the gallery will send out information to the school. And there's a lot of dialogue between the teacher and the museum. Teachers also value facilitated visits, so they really, as Michelle was saying, they really value the input of the gallery educator to take the student through the gallery and introduce them to works of art. There's also a value for our teachers on the experiences in art museums that involve making as a response to artworks. And I know Sandra touched on that this morning, and I know this gallery and Queensland and the Museum of Contemporary Art all have approaches of responding to artworks. And I was interested, I can't remember the word Sandra used this morning, but it wasn't a response, it was, I think, generating.
Honouring.
Yeah, honouring artworks. So, but the teachers I interviewed, and there were 16 teachers I interviewed across a range of programs, really value that expression. Also, too, they value programs directed by practicing artists. Okay, I'm reading off 2 slides here. Okay, so, sorry, I'll go back. Online resources, so that provide learning experiences in a number of ways. So, there are varied ways that teachers do use online resources. So there are different approaches from all 3 art museums I've done. The Museum of Contemporary Art has quite a lot of interactive videos working with artists. This gallery is just restructured all their resources online to have lesson plans and information. So it's interesting, and that's what I'm seeing. There is a little bit of a gap in what teachers are expecting and what galleries are providing, and hopefully the model I present will assist with more collaboration. The teachers also value programs that link to the cross-curricular priorities, and I need to be really clear here, it's within visual arts learning, so not separating them out is a different thing, but within a visual arts curriculum, looking particularly, and as we've seen over the last couple of days, programs with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, Australia's engagement with Asia, both here and in Queensland, have some fantastic resources and programs that identify that. Also, 2 programs that look at the capabilities of the Australian curriculum, so critical and creative thinking, ethical and intercultural understanding, personal, social, literacy and numeracy. Okay. So also too looking at inquiry-based, and it's interesting, I've had, whether it's an E or an I, and constructivist learning programs that encourage student self-direction and planning. Use of strategies like visual thinking strategies and visible thinking, which we've experienced over the last couple of days, embedded into programs by practicing artists, and resources that are developed collaboratively and in consultation with teachers. So particularly Queensland has a teachers advisory group, and there may be people here in the room who are part of that group who really inform the development of their resources, and I know the Museum of Contemporary Art also does that as well. Also we have the value again of art museum educators as facilitators and working with art teachers and enacting curriculum. Okay, with contemporary art, a focus on the conceptual nature of artworks, and we were talking about, and it's been extensively today and over the last couple of days, the issues that students explore with contemporary art, and that's a really strong thread coming through. Study of the artist's practice. So a lot of this too has been informed by my examining curriculum documents. So I looked at curriculum documents, not only the Australian curriculum, but specific curriculums in Queensland, New South Wales, the ACT, Victoria and Western Australia, where all teachers who I interviewed came from. So looking at commonalities across those curriculum. So that was something coming through. Also based concept of the study with subject matter that students are familiar with, which was what was mentioned this morning, and that work with curators and other museum staff to build broad understandings. So these are the main curriculum links. So yeah, I'm getting there. So I investigated all these documents, so I'm just going to go through my slides so I'm up to say. Looking at the context, looking at critical reflection, looking at critical and practical understanding to make meaning. So looking at that concept in the Australian curriculum of making and responding, which everyone talks about, and how that can be embodied with teachers when they come back to school or before. So quite all museums have material that teachers can use before they come to the museum and after, and it probably is really valuable to build teachers' understanding of how they could use those documents. Then Again, one of the other common threads is the idea of ideas, viewpoints and issues, which has come from the Australian curriculum, and particularly in a lot of senior secondary curriculum. So a lot of the teachers I was interviewing had senior students at different levels, so that is a common thread as well. So looking at artworks, and what Nick said on Monday is looking at contemporary and past works to understand different viewpoints and the idea of visual arts making. Okay, so again too, I've developed some interpretive frames which have come from quite a range of curriculum documents, specifically the curriculum I work in, also in New South Wales and in the ACT and to a certain extent in Queensland. So the model will have those frameworks that will have questions that the students can work through. And that's my details. So that's just a snapshot in 20 minutes of what I've done. Thank
you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really great to be here. I've come over from New Zealand to share with you, and it's been a really wonderful 3 days. As you can imagine, New Zealand's a bit of a different context to what you have here, and I thought that me coming here to share my research might be an interesting comparison for you people, and you know, there'll be similarities and differences, but it's always good to have a comparison of practice. So before I start, in New Zealand it's usual for us to give a mihi, which is a warm greeting to important people, and I noticed that over here you have a particular greeting for local tribal people, so I would like to mihi to the local Indigenous people here, and I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to be on the land, and grateful to be here sharing and learning with you guys. So I will now get started. Where do I point this thing? Where's the guy going? What am I doing wrong? Okay, so this is my PhD research that I'm doing, and it's a national study. So here's my question. It's a pretty simple, big question that I wanted to undertake. So I wanted to find out what art gallery educators believed they were doing when they were teaching programs for schools. So it's the perspectives of gallery educators in New Zealand. Now, you know, we've seen a lot of gallery educators on this conference, and I probably think that the number of educators in New Zealand in art galleries are fewer than they have at the Met. Probably there's less than 40 professional art gallery educators in New Zealand, so it's not a very big field. So the origins of my project was my master's, where I, you know, like often people do an in-depth sort of master's and they want to extend it. So I wanted to find out whether my specific learnings in my master's study, which was about the way people learn in this case study in art galleries, novices, whether that was extendable on a national level. In 2011, our national organisation, Museums Aotearoa, Museum Educators Aotearoa New Zealand, went into recess, so there's been no connection between the different people that do our jobs in New Zealand, so I was quite interested to find out what people did, because we don't have the connections we once had, and like I said, being a small discrete field, it was really a good size to do a national study, so that's pretty good for a PhD project. I did my research in 3 stages. Firstly, an overview study, which I actually interviewed everybody. Well, I surveyed everybody in the field, which, as I said, was only about 40, and I got responses from just about everybody, which is really cool. So that's a good standing point for my in-depth study, which was stage 2, where I did some case studies. And I've just recently done some focus groups circulating my findings, just to sort of make sure that people agreed with, you know, have some discussions around what I found. So there's many levels there. So what I came up with from the in-depth research was basically 10 principles, and they're really, really interrelated, and you'll find that they're really, really similar to what people have been speaking about today too. So overall in New Zealand, these are sort of principles that operate within art gallery education for schools. Only talking about school programs, I'm not talking about wider public programs. Collaboration was a really, really big thing. I'm talking about this on two levels, collaboration and learning. So there was a real concern, idea of social learning, and so people interacted together. And you can read the bullet points down the side. I won't read them all out, but so it was coming together in groups in an education session. All the people in the education session, the teacher, the gallery teacher, the classroom teacher, any other adults, supporting adults like parents, and the kids working together to develop learning together. That was quite common. Also wider collaboration, so the necessity for professional collaboration between gallery staff and the educators in schools and other people like people in your venue, and we would like to have connection between other gallery educators nationally, although we have got an association, and obviously that relates to communication. I was really interested in communication because when I did my study, my survey, the first part of it, I put it out to everybody, and it was educators in art galleries, and it was educators in art galleries within cultural complexes, which had museums and stuff as well, which is sort of often a different type of educator, because they do museum education as well as gallery education. And the people that worked in standalone art galleries really had a focus on English language, talking, communication, all those sorts of things, and the curriculum area of English too, along with their programs. That wasn't seen as much as with museum educators who taught art as part of, they had a gallery in their museum or whatever. It was like the professional educators really could see the relationship between visual literacy and other literacies, which was really cool. New Zealand gallery education was all vocational. Gallery educators were really focused on student-centred learning. Things started with students questioning, so it was seen that if we started with the students' questions, then their learning was more in depth, and the gallery teachers had a whole range of different approaches of questioning which supported the students' questions and inquiry. Vocab was seen to be a really important way to support children and students developing more specific understandings, so that was widely acknowledged as an important thing to develop. Visual literacy, of course, like I just said, that's something that's particular to, to the field of visual arts, and so that was something that we can help them develop an understanding of what visual literacy is. And through that, we were really hot on empowering our kids, and I'm sure that you guys probably are too, but I found overall that they were really into empowering the students, and obviously through using their questions, helping them develop their vocabulary and increasing visual literacy, they've got the power to use the art gallery in a way independently, so it becomes their place. And I don't know whether I should talk about the curriculum, but because our curriculum's a wee bit different from yours, but we do have this thing called key competencies, which go through all the areas. You've probably got something like that. The key competencies, one of them is language, so that flows through all the curriculum areas, and so it really does support learning of visual arts. We have a national curriculum. The art gallery was seen as a really wonderful place is a wonderful setting for discourse because of the fact that you come into an amazing, often immersive environment where there are things that you don't really know about, you're unsure about, so you want to immediately talk about it. So that's that bit. This has been spoken about a little bit, the art gallery educator, their role not so much as a teacher, but more as a mediator. So all these connections down the side, I don't need to read them all out, I don't think, but gallery educators are working all the time, not to tell the kids what to do, but to make connections between I guess, the gallery and the people that are coming in, the building, different aspects inside, just making those connections and making things work, working as a conduit between things. So that was a big thing that came out. This all leads to a strong feeling that gallery educators thought their role. I should say that in New Zealand, our galleries are largely pretty small. We get a really small gallery in a place called Nelson in the South Island, but a lot of our galleries are like that. There's not that many city galleries, and even our city galleries are probably smaller than your city galleries. You probably think our city galleries are small galleries. So that idea of belonging, the galleries are kind of like a really distinctive institution within a community, so reflective of the community there. The importance of making people feel welcome, like Michelle was, you were talking about that, weren't you, Michelle? Yeah, welcoming people. That's part of our culture in New Zealand. Down the bottom you can see one important outcome of school programs was seen just to be developing, perfectly valid to be developing gallery visitors, and that doesn't just come from the kids, it also comes from the parents who come with the kids feeling like they're comfortable and safe in the environment, so about making people feel relaxed, their point of view is valid, they can do what they want to the gallery, they can sit or they can stand, they can move around, sometimes we do crazy things in the gallery, all that sort of stuff. I'm not skimming through these too quickly, am I? I figure you can read all that stuff pretty easily, so I'm just saying the main points. And anyone who wants my slideshow, you can get it off me anyway. So in flexibility, that was something, Michelle, were you talking about that too, weren't you? Flexibility, and using different words, yeah. So cognitive flexibility, this is one of those things I started off, because my master's was quite about thinking and learning, and this has got more into the gallery teachers' pedagogy, but the cognitive flexibility is a really big aspect of visual arts learning, and the developing students' thinking and sort of facilitating more in-depth understandings. But also the other side of flexibility was that professionally the art gallery educators really had a strong need to be flexible themselves, just to make all those connections and to facilitate the kids' flexibility. So, the funding. We have a national funding in New Zealand. It's contestable, and it's got sort of criteria that there was quite a lot of complaining actually, and I see people talking about, so there was the sort of seeming that we can't really provide the programs we want necessarily within the funding that we have, because they've got these particular things you have to do, and in art you want to be able to be much more flexible than that, so we need a sort of second funding source or something. Isn't that cool? So in New Zealand, our government contracts, which a lot of our art galleries have, one of the criteria is hands-on learning. So art making is part of just about every school program that we have in New Zealand. So I was really interested to see whether art making was going to be just kind of like, whether it was going to be really well developed into the learning, or whether it was just going to be a sort of an experiential fun thing for the kids to do. And I was really pleased to see that it was a scaffolded aspect of a deeper lesson where they would often go into the gallery and find out about, this is quite good being able to work in the gallery. They go into the gallery and do all sorts of talking and learning and interacting and different activities, and then that would often lead to something that would help develop understandings. And there was a real emphasis on problem-solving art activities, so not particularly wanting to make something that was amazingly finished. Although often the school teachers and the kids and everybody wants to take home sort of thing. But for us, the art gallery educators, it was more about the learning they could get through the making. And as I've said in point 2, that the art making is highly motivating, and so it was like something we were well aware that we could grab hold of that and use that to facilitate and to scaffold further learning. So that was a good thing. Yep. You can down the bottom it says that gallery educators sort of can support school teachers in the development of in their professional development and visual arts, like they like to just observe and have a big talk to you when they're there and find out what they can do in their classroom, how they can follow it up and all these sorts of things, because there's a perception of a decline in art making. Just like you've been talking, some of you people have been talking about in sessions, it seems to be the same in New Zealand too, for a number of reasons, which I won't go into here, but you can talk to me later if you like. So a sideline to the study was professionalism, because, you know, like I said, our professional organisation fell down, well, just sort of fell into not happening anymore, and so as soon as I went into galleries, for my colleagues, they all wanted to talk to me about things like professionalism, so a lot of my conversations were about that. It was very important for them to feel like they were professional, and there was a real sense of isolation, because many of us are working on our own in galleries, or else we're very small teams. There's no big teams of art gallery. Well, you know, there's some people that work in threes. There's a couple that have more than three, but not very many. So we're basically quite isolated, and because gallery education is a specific pedagogy, it is really good to get the support of colleagues, and maybe my research might, that's fine. Maybe my research might facilitate that. It actually already is through the focus groups I had. So contestable funding obviously is competing with your colleagues for funding, so it doesn't really facilitate us all being friendly and sharing, unfortunately. But you know, when we do get together, we are generous to each other, but it's just that it's not set up really, I guess. I think I'll go on to the next one. Okay, so student-centred learning. The next two slides are about student-centred learning, which I was very pleased that the gallery teachers really stressed this. So emotions, prior experience and other motivating experiences were seen as important ways of engaging the kids and engaging their thinking. Okay, so putting another level on the thinking so that they could enrich their thinking by a buy-in, because these things like emotions and memories give us a buy-in to things. Just any gallery visitor, you know, if they see a landscape and they think they've been there, it's like, oh, I've been to that place, you know. It's what makes us engaged. But gallery educators were quite aware of the fact that there were a number of things in galleries that might cause anxiety, particularly for first-time visitors, like, you know, what the building's like, you know, the sort of a wee bit scary, and new ideas and strange-looking artworks. So it was seen as the gallery educator's role to make it feel like a safe place, so people could explore and feel comfortable and be open with their emotions and their thoughts. Another thing to do with student-centred learning was engaging directly with the senses. I love this slide because I was really lucky. A few years back I managed to connect with a violin teacher, and we got these groups of kids coming into the gallery and responding with their tools. They didn't play tunes, they just sort of made sounds, and they came for about 6 weeks, the same kids, and responded to different elements of the art through noises. It was really fun. But I just wanted to say through this one is that although looking is our primary, you know, because we're visual arts, that's usually our primary sense, there's many different, the gallery educators use many different sensory activities, and because our contracts stress hands-on learning as well as it was often art making, but it's also hands-on things in the gallery, like touching stuff and, you know, and moving in front of the artworks, feeling your body, the size of your body in relation to the artworks, moving back and forth. Just all those sorts of things were seen as good ways to engage the kids further and make it more personal for them, make them feel like they had ownership of the experience, make it fun. Right. Thinking. I started off with thinking, actually. When I started doing my PhD, I thought, oh, it can be about thinking, this can be about cognition. But it sort of evolved a bit. So you can probably see that all the slides kind of relate to thinking. But I'll just finish off with one little thought about thinking. So this shows a couple of conceptual artworks to do with identity, indigeneity, culture, all sorts of things like that. And here we've got a kid that's actually got to make something, and you can see the emotion in his face and how proud he is of what he's made. He's made that after sneakily engaging with a whole lot of different things, quite conceptual artworks at really quite a deep level. And he came up with that, and he went home with that, and it looks really cool and fun. But the thinking, wow, it was amazing. It was a really great exhibition, that one. There's a whole lot of different points. You can just read those if you want to or not, but I'd just like to say that I found from my interactions with gallery educators that for them thinking was a social thing, and so thinking occurred in a group setting with all members of the group participating. Individual ideas were important within that group. Thinking in art galleries allows us to think about really important ideas in the world, and also because New Zealand has got so many regional galleries, also local and sort of personally relevant to the children ideals. So it's sort of like a place we can come together and solve problems through art, really. That's what I'd say. I'd like to finish off. Have I got time? Still got 2 minutes?
We've got half a minute.
Okay, half a minute. Yay! Okay, I was gifted this painting to use for my PhD, and it just really says it all. I'll try and tell you the story in 30 seconds, okay? So this Whakatu was, before Europeans came to New Zealand, this is the dawn chorus, and the Whakatu was the first bird that woke up in the morning, and she was meant to be the best singer of all. And so she woke up and she'd sing, and her voice would go right through the forest and fill the forest with this lovely sound. And then Tui woke up and he heard it. Tui's the middle bird, and he was like, wow, that's awesome, I have to join in. So he'd be singing along too with his own voice. They'd be joining in together, and then the bellbird over the side would wake up too, and she'd join in as well. And this wonderful choir of voices would come through the forest, and you wouldn't be able to pick out the individual voices, but they were all there. If anyone stopped singing, it wouldn't be the same. And you can see through the middle there's a rope. That's a harakeke rope that's woven. And that represents learning, and how in the plait we need all the threads to go together to make the strength in learning. And that's the end of it for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Kylie Neagle. I'm the Education Officer at the Art Gallery of South Australia. I am responsible for developing professional development sessions for educators, as well as designing resources to help support educators in an excursion. Part of my master's research was in engaging adolescents with the art museum, and I had a real interest in equipping students with 21st century skills, which includes critical and creative thinking. Part of my research I came across obviously BTS, which has already been talked about, but Robert Diani, who's the author of Critical and Creative Thinking for Teachers, and he says that learning to see ABA requires patience, effort and practice, which of course leads to critical and creative thinking. And works of art are really the prime vehicle in which to practice these skills. When I began at the gallery, guided visits were, and really still are, in high demand, except they are run by volunteers. So to give you some idea, in 2018 we had 40,000 students visit the gallery, far more than we have the capacity to provide guided visits for. And so some teachers, particularly non-art teachers, feel very nervous about taking their students through the gallery. So we needed to provide them with tools to make them feel comfortable when facilitating their own sessions. So this is where the curiosity cards came in, and they are 52 prompts to spark curiosity about art, ideas and the world. The aim of a visit when using the cards is really to provide alternative ways into a work of art, which is not content-led, experience in long looking and in order to develop visual literacy and improve critical and creative thinking skills. A self-guided visit can often be a really daunting experience for educators, with their students seeing works of art in situ, sometimes for the first time and sometimes the only time. So it's not really about walking away with information about a work of art, but really about making connections between the student and the work of art. So this activity about drawing a work of art on display is not a drawing activity, it's actually an exercise in looking. And it was sort of music to my ears on Monday when Ben Quilty talked about drawing being about looking and responding, and it's about hand-eye coordination, it's not about really being a good drawer. And so what better way to practice that skill but with works of art? Making a mark on a canvas or the first word on a page for an essay is often the hardest one to make. So the curiosity cards are a really great icebreaker to get your students making connections to work of art almost immediately. This activity requires you to think of a word in response to a work of art, with everyone having a go. In 2018 we had the Adelaide Biennial, and we showed students this work of art, and they had to come up with a list of words to respond in response to it, and some came up with sweet, fantasy, candy, unicorns, fairies, wonderland, over the top, and sugar. It was about making connections and allowing them to have their voice heard. Everyone had to have a go. Making connections between works of art is also a common theme throughout the pack of cards, and some may ask for a thematic association or a common subject matter, but in this case we're looking through a different learning area to link works of art together. So the questions range from quick responses to extended, where more time is required. One teacher in particular has turned an entire, for one question to an entire unit of work, where she's taken, respond with a piece of music, she's taken a whole display, the students create a soundtrack for a room, which is, we can't wait to see the results of that. One of the really great things about these cards is that they are for all ages, for visitors of all ages, needing to help to find a way into a work of art, but may not know how or where to start. A St John's Grammar student came year 2 with her class, and the teacher asked them to pick a work that shows a sense of movement. And the student selected this work by Xian, and she explained why is because it was like a conductor in front of an orchestra, and the way that the orchestra would move their hands in order to conduct the musicians is the same way that the painter would have made the marks. This one is actually just one of my favourites that I wanted to share with you. Select a work of art that best represents one of the words below. It's almost the reverse of the first activity I showed you. So I also like to add fast and slow to this addition. At AXA, we're really lucky to have a thematically hung gallery, so we've got lots of different spaces that we can use, but this is something that you could also use in classrooms by just simply providing postcards of works of art or printouts from the internet, but allowing time for discussion. This could range from 5 or a 20-minute activity. Just thought I'd share one that I have often. I'll always do this work of art, or this work of art is always picked, I should say, and throughout my time in running sessions it's been soft, dry, fast, slow, quiet, and cold. But the best thing is that there's no wrong answer, and that it's a personal response and it's building a capacity to think. There's a simple creative writing task. Write a story about a person depicted in a portrait. Use your imagination. This is quite simple, but you're actually asking them to assess visual information. Assess it for clues about the person, their attire, their age, their surroundings, and their body language. It's about being visually literate. It's not really even about a creative writing task. So we need to be able to instill students and young people, really, to read visual information, to make judgments, to interpret, to evaluate, which leads to problem solving, and works of art are really the best way, or the best vehicle for us to achieve that. Teaching children to think critically is paramount if they are to thrive in our ever-changing and image-saturated world, and curiosity cards paired with some works of art are really the perfect tool, strategy to do that, or to practice that, like was mentioned earlier in my research. So these cards are available online from our gallery store, and like I said, you can use them anywhere.
Okay, so I just wanted to share a project that I've been doing in the classroom for the last few years, and it's been really successful. So as I said, I was originally talking about bravery. I like that second quote there. Bravery can also be a shy child walking in the new classroom. Sometimes we forget that just the act of being creative is a really brave thing. Here's just some of the things that some of our students might be going through at any one particular time that they have to, work against to even show something of themselves. So I work in a school where there's boys only and almost like a military school, so it can be, for them to show subtlety or anything about themselves can be a real act of bravery. We use Xian as an inspiration for this project, and he's a really interesting artist. He was a refugee, political refugee from China. And he's a great contemporary artist because pretty much everybody just likes his work, gets something from it straight away, which is really good for kids. So we'll start with an anatomical discovery, so self-portrait, making it look human, using correct proportions and things like that, and then go into modifying. And kids really like this idea of starting with themselves, but then adding adornments, changing. Some kids prefer digital natives, so we also do a Photoshop version. So you do multiple, ways of coming into your own response to this work by Xian. So it's just might be like, what if my tied to a little fish, or what if a tree grew out of my head? Kids sort of pick this up pretty quickly, and we show the Photoshop skills as well. We'll then go to an expert video to show how to make. We're going to make our own version of these sculptures. So I found this artist, American-French artist Philippe Ferrou, has these great videos. He suggested one called Geometry for kids if you wanted to do this project. Here's just a step-by-step. So I just made this for this presentation, just a photograph step-by-step. So you start with a ball of paper on a stick, make a light glow with clay, add in the eye sockets, nose, lips, and here this video takes you step by step through this. Once you get to this point here, you get the ears on, you get all the details on, and then you say to the kids, okay, freestyle, okay, modify, and they love it. And it's amazing that it takes a couple of weeks for them to get to that point, but they've developed such skill that they really quickly get onto the modifications. It's really, really, really great to see them take ownership. All right, now for the kids. So now we add on colours, and I guess their creativity comes out, and they get into things like it's them expressing themselves on images of themselves. They look at things like tattoo and body adornment, so all sorts of really interesting. They make it really unique. And they're all really eager to get wild and wonderful, soft and subtle modifications. Why do I think this project works really well? Okay, so it starts with themselves. It asks students to develop skills and then to depict themselves. And then it liberates them to apply imagination to express themselves through customisation. You can see we've got superheroes, we've got devil child, we've got soft and warm, cuddly, cute animal guises. We've got nods to the gay marriage debate. And again, like in a school where that's sort of not the done thing, this is a real safe place for them to do that. And they really do feel the freedom to express all these ideas in this way, because this artist has done such a good job. So here, I guess there's our little soldiers, but they are modified soldiers, getting ready to get into the kiln and get fired. And then that's the gloss coat, second coat of firing. And then coming out of the kiln, obviously the kids are pretty keen, pretty eager to see how their work looks. So yeah, this customisation by association gives students a licence to express themselves. We see experiments with all sorts of things. Obviously, you get the sense it's very boys oriented. I'm sure girls will go in different directions, but but boys to be exploring. We've got the no drama llama, we've got the candles, we've got the shark boy, who, and we've got, you know, what someone might grow into when he gets a beard, for example. This is a year 8 sort of level project. The more sensitive souls might add subtle hints into nature, eco sustainability. We've got mental health, cultural, people's cultural backgrounds, pop art, pop culture, warriorship. One year we thought let's try with plasticine. That worked really well. A little bit more entry to get started, but the same sort of process, and ended up with fantastic storytelling in animations, utilising these busts, these heads. And then, of course, it really does look quite impressive when you get 50 or more of these individual heads on display, and the kids are so proud to, they really run around and they want to show everyone their version of themselves and their creativity. It's embraced by the whole community, really, like all the teachers and others. You really look forward to seeing the next iteration of the year 8 heads. And they're really skillful. They have their creativity presented in a really skillful way, which they're really proud of. And they get to explore their likes and their fears. The range of creativity is really, really impressive. The community really embraces it. Any that don't get claimed by the students or their parents are really quickly adopted by teachers, and you'll find them in garden beds, on teachers' desks, in offices. Even I found it recently in the gardeners' tool sheds, got a couple of these little heads, because everyone they just love seeing the students in a different light. So, hope you enjoy it.